Hello chess fans and welcome to Chess Type. And today I'm going to show you the game between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave vs Alireza Firouzja. And this game is from the Grand Chess 2 Paris 2021 Rapid and this is the round number 9. And in the previous round Maxime was crushed by WhiteElo, and in the 7th round Maxime crushed Ian Nepomniachtchi, which has been qualified for the World Chess Championship title to fight against Magnus Carlsen. And all those who doesn't know who's Alireza Firouzja is, Alireza Firouzja is a young prodigy, just recently turned into 18 years old, and he also plays a fantastic chess. So obviously we are going to love this game. So without any further ado, let's dive into this game. So Maxime with the white pieces started with 1 e4, and Alireza replied with e5. Here we have knight to f3, knight to c6, and here we have bishop to b5. The Roy Lopez opening. So Maxime played so Alireza played a6, attacking the bishop on b5 and asking whether he wants to grab the knight on c6 or whether he wants to go back to a4. So here Maxime played bishop to a4. Here we have b5, bishop to b3, and knight to a5, directly going for the bishop on b3. So Maxime just opened up the position by playing d4. Here we have e into d4, knight into d4. Here we have bishop to b7, developing the pieces and also putting pressure on the e4 pawn. So here Maxime simply castled, and here Alireza played c5. The idea of playing c5 is, here the pawn on c5 is attacking the knight on d4, and the plan is to also to push the pawn on c4. So after c5, white played knight to f5. He have to move the knight because the knight was attacked by the pawn. And here Alireza simply pushed the pawn to c4. And if you look closely, the bishop on b3 is now trapped. The white bishop is now completely trapped on b3. And here Maxime simply played bishop to f4. And here Alireza simply captured the bishop on b3, a into b3, and here we have knight to c6 because the rook was attacking the knight on a5. And if you see this position and count the material, black is a piece plus for a pawn. Black is actually, practically speaking, on the board, it's completely winning for black, as black is a piece up. But according to engine, it says it's slightly better for black. The reason why computer is showing it is slightly better for white, slightly better for black, because your white is having a huge amount of development. Your white pieces are all developed. Here white has successfully castled. His queen on d1 is very open, and his all pieces can come like rook e1, knight to c3, perhaps knight to d5, and something stuff like that. And if we see closely to black pieces, if black haven't castled yet, his all pieces on the king's side has not been developed. So obviously that is the reason that it is showing that it is slightly better for black, like minus 0.5. So after knight to c6, Maxime played knight to c3, developing the piece. And here Alireza played g6. The idea of playing g6 is, now by playing g6, the pawn is attacking the knight on f5, and black is also preparing to put the bishop on g7. So here Maxime played knight to d6 check, giving a check and also preparing to capture the bishop on b7. So the fourth move is to capture the knight. Here bishop into d6, and the bishop is very nicely placed on d6 check, like just covering all the critical squares of the black. See here black played knight to e7. Now, at the place of knight to e7, a better move could be to play f6. The idea of playing f6 is, now black is preparing to put his king on f7, and then playing knight e7, preparing the rook to come to e8, and black will be simply better in this position. The idea of playing f6 at the place of playing knight e7 is, now we can see that the black dark squares are very weak. Dark squares are very weak on the king side for black. So it can be a problem for black in the future. But okay, knight e7 was played in the game, and here white played knight to d5. putting the pieces like on the center squares, and the threat of white is to now, like white can go knight f6 with a check and can break the black castle, and the second threat can be to put the knight on c7 with a check and forking the rook as well as the king. So here black simply castle and the king is safe. And so here white played bishop to c7, attacking the queen on d8. So black played the queen to c8. Here we have knight to f6 check, king to g7, attacking the knight on f6, and the queen is also attacking the bishop on c7. So here the fourth move for white is to play queen to d6, and if you look this position closely, white has all pieces, all minor pieces, and the queen on the kings till the 6th rank, and it looks very dangerous for actually both the colors, for black as well as white. It looks dangerous for black because of course white pieces are on the black side, and it looks scary for white also because white pieces can be in trouble in the future. So that's why after queen to d6, here black played rook to a7. The idea of playing rook to a7 is now black is preparing to put the bishop on a8 and attacking the bishop on c7. So here white played rook a to d1, developing the piece and also putting pressure on the d7 pawn. So here after rook to d1, black played knight to g8, asking for a knight trade. So here Maxime captured the pawn on d7 at the place of capturing the knight, and also the knight on d7 is now attacking the rook on f8. So the only move for black is to play rook to e8 because the knight was attacking the rook on f8 and the rook is attacking the pawn on e4. So after rook to e8, white played here bishop to b6, attacking the rook on a7, rook to a8. Here we have queen to d3, taking the queen back. Actually it's an equal position, and queen d3 was a blunder by Maxime. At the place of playing queen to d3, a much better move could be to play bishop to d4 check. Here comes knight into d4, queen into d4. Here we have f6 because obviously the knight, there could be some dark square weaknesses. So after f6, white plays knight to b6, attacking the queen as well as the rook on a8. So black captures the pawn on e4 with the rook. Here we have queen to d7 check, queen into d7, rook into d7 check, rook to e7 because the bishop was also hanging on b7. So now comes the rook into b7, a very nice move by white. Here we have rook into b7, knight into a8, and this position is equal for both the sides because although white is a pawn up, but nothing is going to happen because as it looks like white knight is trapped, but okay, the rook will come and save it, and it's an equal position. But what happened in the game, queen to d3 was played, which was a blunder by Maxime, because now comes a very powerful move by Alireza Firouzja. First playing f6, a calm move. The idea of playing f6 is now there are no dark square weaknesses, because there could be some threats of white to play bishop to d4 check like this stuff. So that's why f6 was a nice move by Alireza Firouzja. And after f6, white played f4. The idea of playing f4 is now white wants to open up the position by playing e4, e5 and f5 and try to make the black king weak. So after f4, although it's a completely winning position for black because white just blundered when white played queen to d3, because after f4 black played a very nice move in this position, which is knight to b4. And the idea of playing knight to b4 is now there are many moves for black, many ideas for black in this position. First idea is now the knight is attacking the queen on d3. Second idea is now the knight and the queen is attacking the pawn on c2. And third idea is here the bishop and the rook is attacking the pawn on e4. That's why it's like completely winning position for black. So after knight to b4, white played queen to d2. The idea is to capture the knight on b4, and in this position Maxime captured the pawn on c2, which was a blunder by Alireza Firouzja. he just gave up the knight on b4, which equalizes the position. At the place of capturing the pawn on c2, he should have played rook into e4. The point of playing rook into e4 is now the rook is protecting the knight on b4, and still now there is still a threat to capture the pawn on c2, and the bishop is protecting the rook on e4. So it's a completely winning position for black in this position. But queen into c2 was played, which was a blunder by Alireza Firouzja. He just gave up the knight on b4, which I think he didn't saw the knight was hanging on b4. So here comes rook into e4, attacking the queen on b4. Here we have queen c3 asking for a queen trade. Here comes rook to e2. He didn't gone for the queen trade because after a queen trade, white pawn structure became nice. So that's why he restricted it and playing rook e2. The idea is to create threat on the g2 pawn. So here Maxime simply captured the queen on c2. Here we have rook into c2, rook to f2 because there was a threat on the g2 pawn. So here we have rook into f2, king into f2, king to f7, and this is an equal position for both the sides. Actually a slightly better position for white because white pieces are much more active. So after king to f7, white played knight to c5, attacking the bishop on b7. So black played bishop to c6, rook to d6, attacking the bishop on c6. Here we have knight to e7, developing the piece and also attacking the bishop, also protecting the bishop on c6. Here white played knight to e6, perhaps planning to put the knight on c7 and also making a way for bishop to go back. So after knight to e6, black played rook to c8. So plan can be to move the bishop from the c6 square and the rook will be open. So after rook to c8, white played g4. The idea of playing g4 is now white is trying to gain space on the king side, which would help him in the end game. So after a g4, black played bishop to d5, attacking, preparing to capture the knight on e6, and the bishop is protected by the knight on e7. So after bishop to d5, the bishop is also attacking the pawn on b3, and there could also be threats like rook to c2 check, capturing up the pawn on b2. So there are many threats in this position for white. So after bishop to d5, here white played knight to c7. So now the rook cannot come to c2, will give a check, and the knight is also not hanging anymore. So here black simply captured up the pawn on b3 with the bishop, and here white played bishop to a5. Here black pushes the pawn to h5. Here we have g5, gaining space on the king side. Here we have h into g5, f into g5, bishop to c2. Here we have rook into a6, capturing up a pawn. Here we have b4. Here white cannot capture the pawn on b4 because the knight is hanging on c7. So white gave a check on f6. So black played king to g8. Here we have rook to e6, attacking the knight on e7. King to f7, rook to d6. Here we have b3. Now the pawn is on light square, so it can no longer be targeted by the bishop. So white played bishop to b6. Here we have bishop to f5, h4. Now the white pawn is on dark square, so it can no longer be targeted by the bishop on f5. So black played bishop to c2. Here we have king to e1, bishop to f5, king to d2. If we have rook to b8, attacking putting some pressure on the bishop on b6. So here white played bishop to c5. Here because the bishop was attacked on b6, so black played rook to c8, attacking the knight on c7 as well as the bishop on c5. So white played bishop to b6, here protecting the knight on c7. So black repeated the position by playing rook b8, and here white played king to c3. Here white is preparing to capture the pawn on b3, and the bishop is for now not attacked because the rook is protecting the bishop. So black played here rook to b7. Here we have king to c4. Here white cannot capture the pawn on b3 because knight c8 is a threat, and the bishop and the rook, if both are attacked, and the bishop cannot be moved because it's a pin, so white will lose a piece. So that's why after rook to b7, white played king to c4, bringing the king to support his pieces. Here after king to c4, black played bishop to c2, protecting the pawn on b3. Here we have rook to f6 check, king to g8, knight to e6, a fantastic move by Maxime. The idea of playing knight to e6 is white is just giving up the piece on b6. So Alireza captured the bishop on b6, and here comes rook to f8 check. Here king is forced to move on h7 because the g7 square is covered by the knight and the rook is also protected by the knight. So here if you have king h7, rook to f7 check, king to g8, rook to g7 check, and king is forced to go on h8. Here we have rook into e7, capturing a piece and also protecting the knight on e6. So here we have rook to a6, king to d5. It's an equal position, but practically it looks dangerous for black, as white is preparing to get his king on the king side. Perhaps there would be a checkmate, but according to an engineer, it's an equal position, nothing is going to happen. So black played rook to a1, preparing to come up with his rook, capturing up a pawn. So white played rook to f7. Here we have bishop to f5, knight to d4, bishop to c2. Here king to e5. Here rook to a5 check, king to f6. Now there is the threat of first capturing. For now the king cannot capture because the bishop is protecting it, but there could be some threats of like rook f8 check, rook f7 check. There could be some threats as the king is in the corner. So after king f6, black played rook a6 check. Here we have knight e6. Here we have bishop to f5, rook to e7. Here king to g8, just trying to remove the king from this like back rank mate ideas. So after king to g8, white played rook to e8 check, kicking the king to this last file, and the king looks for black it looks very scary because there could be a lot of opportunities for black to get checkmated. So after king to h7, white played king to f7. Now there could be some serious threat of playing knight to f8 check. So that's why here bishop captured the knight on e6. Here we have rook into e6, rook to a4. If black captured the rook on if black would have traded the rook on e6, then after king into e6, this is winning position for white because white is fast and he's going to capture the b3 pawn and he's going to push the pawn and he's going to win the game. That's why trading the rook is not possible. That's why after rook into e6, black played rook to a4. Now preparing to capture the pawn on h4. Here white played rook to e7. Here we have rook to f4 check, king to e6 check with the rook, king to g8, rook to b7. Here we have rook into h4, king to f6, and in this position Maxime blundered by playing rook to d4, and now it's winning position for white. So in this position, feel free to pause the video and try to find the only move which draw the game for black in this position. Okay, so to those who have found the right move, congratulations on finding the only move which draws for black in this position. The right move in this position is to play, sorry, this is the wrong move. The right move is to play rook to f4 check. And the idea of playing rook to f4 check is, here white captures the pawn on g6 and here black pushes the pawn to h4. And after rook b8, there is no checkmate because rook is coming back to f8 to support the king. So in this best move in this position for white is to capture the pawn on b3. So black plays rook f2. Perhaps there could be some plan to capture the pawn on b2, and now there are plan to push the pawn to h3. So the best move for white is to play check, rook f8, and even though would have been rook trade, all the white is a pawn up, but nothing is going to happen. It's a draw game because after king into f8, king h7, h3, g6, h2. Here we have g7 check, and at the place of playing king f7, because then white will promote with a check, so black plays king to e7. Here we have g8 queen, h1 queen, and here we have king to g7 check. Here queen to g2 check, king to h7, and trading the queen, and black is fast enough, so after king to d6 he is going to reach the pawn fast and going to capture the pawn, and it would be a draw game. But after king to f6, what happened in the game? Here Alireza played rook to d4, which was a blunder, because now comes king to g6, king into g6, capturing a pawn, and now there is a threat. Now white is threatening a checkmate on rook b8 checkmate, because now there is no rook f8, so that black can stop the checkmate. So now h4 is not possible because now it's a mate. That's why here Alireza is forced to give check on d6. Here we have king into h5, rook to d3, protecting the pawn. Here we have king h6, trying to give a check, then check, and going to win the game. So black give a check on h3. Here we have king g6, threatening a checkmate. So king to f8, rook to b8 check, king to e7, king to g7, rook to g3. You're pushing the pawn because the rook was attacking the pawn on g5. So king to e6, rook to b6 check, and after king to d5, in this position, Alireza Firouzja with the black pieces resigned the game, and Maxime with the white pieces won the game. A fantastic game by both the players, but after move number 77, Alireza resigned the game. And the reason Alireza resigned the game after playing king to d5, because white is simply going to move the king to f7, and after rook f3, white is simply going to put the rook on between onto f6 and going to push the pawn and going to win the game. So it was a nice game by both the players, although I don't know that perhaps there could be some preparation, like after white gave up a piece for free for taking one pawn, and for practically for somebody who doesn't see in this position quite a lot, it looks like black is completely winning in this position because black is a piece up, but according to engine it's an equal position. So obviously it was a very interesting game, but in the middle game Alireza was winning the game completely, but then he also blundered the piece on b4, and which made the game equal. And then Maxime is much experienced player than Alireza Firouzja because in terms of age. So that's fine. In this counter between Maxime and Alireza Firouzja, Maxime took the game against Alireza Firouzja. Very well played by both the players. So guys, if you like this game, then please like to my video. If you are new to my channel, then please subscribe to my channel. I will come up with these new videos for you. So thank you for watching, and bye bye.